There was an interesting study done where they just stopped kids from using devices for a week, for 5 days, and they had improved facial expression perception just after 5 days. A toddler would normally learn what facial expressions go to with what emotions, because they'd say they'd be playing in the park or something and they'd fall over and hurt themselves, and they'd have a bad feeling, and they'd look up to their carer, and the carer would look sad because they just saw them fall over. If the carer's on the phone, they don't see those things happening, so they don't respond to them. There's no facial expression. So the toddler doesn't actually then learn the association between the different feelings and the different facial expressions, which then makes it hard for them to have friends, because if you're not able to portray how you're feeling to someone else, then they don't understand how you're feeling. So therefore, there's no empathy going on for your behaviour. Also, there's huge correlation between ADHD and screen use, right? And there's also the studies in the US now showing the abnormal development of the white matter tracts in kids who have been given devices at a young age. And all of those things really concern me as to where that's going to end up, because we've never seen this before, right?
Dr. Mark Williams is a cognitive neuroscientist, best-selling author and global educator who went from high school dropout to MIT fellow, all because one physics teacher believed in him. He spent over 2 decades decoding how our brains learn, connect, and hallucinate reality itself, from face perception and neuroplasticity to why smartphones might literally be rewiring our children's brains. His book, The Connected Species, unpacks why human survival hinges on connection, and why understanding your brain is the first step to fixing the fractured modern world. Subscribe if you want to learn why your senses lie to you, your IQ isn't fixed, and why even mantis shrimp might be living in a more colourful universe than you are.
When I was about 15, my principal told me I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 25. I was never academic at all. I thought I was quite dumb, to be honest. I grew up in this very small country town, and my mother had bipolar disorder and mental health issues. It wasn't until I was about 25 that I had 2 friends had drug overdoses. There was a physics teacher there that we sort of bonded back then. He convinced me that I was more intelligent than I thought I was, and that I should go to university. And so I did a Bachelor of Science and majored in physiology and psychology, and went on, did PhD in medicine, and then got a fellowship to go to MIT in the USA. So I wasn't as dumb as I thought I was.
Mark Williams, how does our brain construct our reality?
You're going for a big one there, Evan.
My favourite
question. Yes. It constructs our reality based on prior experiences in most cases. So if you take, I like using sound because it's really easy, right? When I speak, if we're in the same room, the microphones make it a little bit more complicated. But if you're in the same room, when I speak, my voice box moves, which causes a pressure wave to come out of my mouth, which then goes through the air and it bounces off your eardrum, and then your 3 little bones, small bones in your body move, and then another little membrane moves, and then your cochlea moves, which pushes hair cells up against the tympanic membrane, which causes activity to go into your auditory cortex, which then goes through into your prefrontal cortex or somewhere in your brain. We're not quite really sure. And then your brain creates this illusion that you're hearing a sound, right? But what's actually coming out of my mouth is actually just a wave. And so there's this reinterpretation of the inputs that it's receiving, which would be important for us from an evolutionary point of view to detect quickly. And so we needed to detect sound. And so we created this illusion that we're hearing sounds, which aren't really sounds. They're just vibrations of air that are occurring in the environment. And so all of our perceptions are very similar. The same with touch, right? If you put your fingers flat on a surface, you can't feel anything. You've actually got to move your fingers across the surface to create a vibration across your fingers to actually feel it. And most surfaces, if you go slowly across them, they feel rougher, and if you go quickly across them, they feel smoother. Now, the surface isn't changing, it's just your perception based on the input that you're receiving, and that input isn't actually what you're perceiving. What you're perceiving is a reinterpretation of that information based on what's important for us as humans to actually perceive. It'd be really weird to see, to perceive lots of different frequencies of pressure, right? So we created this weird thing which is sounds, but they don't actually exist in the world.
Right. It's a convincing illusion, though, right? We're all, every day we wake up and we are fooled by our perceptual system that we all walk in this objective reality and that our senses relay an accurate idea of what's really out there. It always astonishes me how there's so many interesting examples, like we were talking about, related to like synesthesia and these conditions where people are clearly just experiencing such a different reality. I think it's a point that just isn't echoed enough. I think it's one of the most amazing things ever. It's an amazing fact in the world.
Yeah, even color. I mean, color's amazing from it for normals, right? Because we know that the number and ratio of the photoreceptors in our retina are different for each individual. They're very similar to our fingers, to the marks on our fingers. So we all receive different inputs from the same color, and so therefore, according to that, we should be all seeing different colors
Yes.
because we're all receiving different ratios of the different from the different photoreceptors. Like none of our retinas are the same. So therefore, we're going to be perceiving different colors. And the colors, of course, themselves, there's no evidence that color exists in the world. It's simply different spatial frequencies of light that have been reflected off different surfaces. And we reinterpret that as color so that we assume from an evolutionary point of view, we evolved that ability to find fruit, right? But because when fruit ripens, it changes color. It's of huge value to us, but only when it's ripe. It's no value to us when it's not ripe. So we needed some way of standing on the ground and seeing when the fruit ripened, which is why we're attracted to reds, oranges, and yellows, because those are the colors that most fruit ripens to. And now we use those in emergency vehicles and stuff. But there's no evidence that there's any color out there in the world. It's just what we perceive. And other animals, fish, for example, see colours in a whole different spectrum to us. So, they're seeing a whole different world to what we're seeing. Whereas, if you've got a dog or a cat at home, they don't see the colours that we see. So
Yeah.
again, they're seeing a different world. I mean, it's wonderful to think about what are different animals, how they perceive the world, right? You think of,
Yes.
a whale that can perceive kilometres away, or an elephant that through its feet can feel what's happening, kilometers away through the vibrations. I mean, it must be amazing. Or a bat that can, see at night. It's just, phenomenal. Some of the
It's
when you
astounding,
think
right?
about it.
Have
Yeah.
you read An Immense World by Ed Young? He just goes into the remarkable sensory systems that evolution has granted all of nature. Like it's just they have such fascinating ways of interacting with their environment and gaining useful information from their environment based on their specific ecological niche. I think it's the what is the mantis shrimp that punches and like basically ignites the water in front of the like its fist is moving so fast that it ignites the water into air as it punches and can smash glass, and it has like 13 cones or so. It has like an absurd sensory system as well. It's If you haven't read that book, I would absolutely recommend that you dive
I'll
into
have
it.
to have
It's
a look.
he goes into just the strangest examples of exactly what you just mentioned.
Yeah, like there's the mole, right? There's a mole. It's blind. I think it's called the hairless mole, and it has all these several lots of tentacles on its nose that it
Yes,
uses
the
to actually
star nose
see in the
mole,
ground.
right?
Yes, yeah, and it
Yeah.
actually, I still remember talking to a biologist, and they were saying, I was talking about that our fovea and how we've got very acute resolution at the fovea, and he was saying it similarly has a fovea like we have, and it uses attention in a very similar way that we do with these, which is just amazing, right? And it's using touch in a similar way that we use sight.
Right.
It's evolved a completely different sensory system to do the same thing.
Mark, you have a very unconventional route to becoming a neuroscientist. What are the most important contexts from your life for the listeners to understand who you are today?
Yeah, I was never academic at all. I thought I was quite dumb, to be honest. I grew up in this very small country town, and my mother had bipolar disorder and mental health issues, and I avoided school back then here in Australia. You There was corporal punishment in school, so you get the strap or the cane if you were naughty, and I wanted to avoid getting hit by my teachers, so I'd avoid school. And when I was about 15, my principal told me I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 25. So I should go and get a job at the local abattoir. So I left and didn't do very well at all. It wasn't until I was about 25 that I had two friends had drug overdoses. So I decided to go back to what we call TAFE. It's sort of like a college for mature age students to get my HSC to get my final year so I could do something. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but there was a physics teacher there that we sort of bonded. Back then there was records were the big thing, and I collected records and so did he. And so we bonded over the records. And he convinced me that I was more intelligent than I thought I was and that I should go to university. And so I did a Bachelor of Science and majored in physiology and psychology, and went on, did PhD in medicine, and then got a fellowship to go to MIT in the USA. So I wasn't as dumb as I thought I was. But I think the big thing that I think that I like, and I like to talk to schools especially about, is that our IQ is not set, right? It's not determined by our genes. Our IQ is really determined in the vast amount of our IQ is determined by our environment and what we learn and the opportunities that we have. And you're not born smart. You become smart because you've got people around you who are willing to give you an opportunity. And in your IQ, I mean, we now know even, in your teen years, your IQ can change from up to 15 basis points, which is quite a significant amount of time just during your teen years, and changes heaps more during your childhood, and it continues to change as you're an adult. So I think people need to realize that, those kids who are struggling today could become the next Einstein. And as we know, Einstein struggled at school, right? He hated school and, had dyslexia and all sorts of things. And it wasn't until he got into the patent office as a clerk that he actually started to really fall in love with science as well. So not that I'm anywhere near Einstein's sort of caliber, but I think we need to realize that we've all got potential, and we've all got, if we're given the opportunity, and I think we need to give everybody the opportunity. And this whole idea that kids are born a certain way, so you test young kids and you stick them into different classes based on their so-called intelligence levels, and that's the way they'll be for the rest of their lives is just wrong. And it's inhibiting a lot of kids from becoming smart or
Right.
Reaching their full potential.
What do you think the key is? How do we help more kids and students realize that they have an enormous amount of potential to give, that they can go out? I mean, the phrase at the moment is they can just do things, right? Especially with the enormous capabilities of AI agents. A single individual has never had more ability to have impact in the world than they do today. But what's the secret to helping them realize it? Because it can fall on deaf ears often. How do you get them to realize it, like your physics teacher did for you?
Yeah, it's connection before curriculum, right? It's actually connecting with the kids first before you try and teach them, because
Right.
we are very good at detecting who we trust and who we don't trust. And so if you're part of the in-group, then they're going to learn from you. And if you're not part of the in-group, they're not going to trust you, so they're not going to believe you. So they're not going to then, thrive in your environment. And we've all had those teachers that we liked, right? That we got along with, and we loved those subjects, and we did really well in those subjects, and we were keen to stay in those subjects. And then there was the teachers we didn't like, which usually is maths teachers, unfortunately, which is sad because maths is fascinating. But there's always those teachers that you don't like, and then you fall out in that subject, and then that's the end for that subject or whatever it happens to be. Or at school altogether, right? There's the naughty kids that all the teachers know about them. They all talk about them in the staff room, and
Yeah.
they're never given the opportunity because they never connect with them. And so teachers have to connect, and we need to create communities around schools again. We used to have communities around schools, right? The schools were part of the community, and they were open, and people would be involved in them, and parents would be involved in them, and so on. And that doesn't happen anymore these days in a lot of countries. They're closed units, and the teachers don't have the time to spend with the students that they need to spend with the students, actually getting to know them, and getting them to thrive, right? Getting to believe in the fact that they're worthwhile.
I've thought for a while that one way that you could massively improve the quality of teaching is just triple their salaries. It's kind of a joke in some sense, but it would just create a massive competition. Like, imagine there was the same level of competition to teach kids maths than there was to become a banker at, to become a banker or to become an AI researcher, or, imagine it was a position that was praised in our society as much as those positions. It granted you as much status, if it was a really hard position to get, because it should be, because it's so unbelievably important.
Absolutely, and if you look at like Finland is seen as one of the best education systems in the world, because of their outcomes, but also because of the mental health, the positive mental health outcomes, and so on as well. And you can't become a teacher in Finland unless you've got a master's degree, right? And they get paid the same as doctors and lawyers and so on. So
Wow.
they're well respected, and they're paid well, and they've got to have a master's degree. You can't just do an undergraduate and become a teacher. And it's one of the most difficult courses to get into in that country, because everybody wants to do it because it's well paid, and they're treated as professionals, and everybody wants to be one. So
It's a great
it's
example.
one of those professions that you want to be in. So it's a fantastic example. But
Right.
that means actually, funding it, right? We need the governments to fund the schools so that they can actually pay those amounts, which is the other big problem.
2025 is the year that me and you are going to fix our sleep. Now, that does not mean that we need to go full Brian Johnson on it, but one thing we can do that's super easy is to buy the highest quality sleep mask on the market, and that is Manta. I've been blown away by how much better I sleep with one of these on. It's just a fact that people are not sleeping in completely dark environments, and studies show that that affects sleep quality, time to get to sleep, and increases the fragmentation of your sleep. I have tried other sleep masks. I first bought one on Amazon last year for like €5, but the problem is they're just really poor quality. They don't really block out any of the light, and you can't adjust them to your planet-sized head. Manta is fully adjustable, so it literally will fit all of the strangest and weirdest size heads out there, like mine. The Manta mask is literally completely blackout. I have studio lights coming at me from here, and I can't tell the difference. It is absolutely pitch black. This is the perfect environment that you need for sleep. Manta honestly feels like you're being cuddled by a cloud. I actively enjoy and look forward to putting these on each night. I just realized how boring that makes my life sound. I sleep with Manta every single night, and I've seen direct improvements in the quality, duration, and how rested I feel when I wake up. My Whoop data seems to agree. I also bought one for my girlfriend, and she also loves it. Manta have a bunch of different sleep masks on their website. I have tried the normal sleep mask as well as the sound mask. I like to listen to audiobooks at night, so for that reason, the sound mask was actually really, really good. For some reason, my girlfriend doesn't want to listen to how reality is a perception at 11 o'clock when we're trying to sleep, so this was a really good solution for that. It's also incredibly comfortable. But as I said, I think for most people, like 90% of people, the normal, ordinary mask is going to fill their requirements. Super comfortable and completely adjustable. Literally is just a really high quality, well made product. It's the best on the market. Manta are giving my viewers 10% off their first sleep mask. They ship internationally, and they also offer a 60-day free trial. That's 59 of the best nights of sleep you've ever had. I literally promise that. But if for any reason you aren't satisfied, you will get your money back, no questions asked. I really couldn't recommend more if you're looking to do something to improve your sleep. A sleep mask is the lowest hanging fruit. It's so simple and easy to apply, and I think it will benefit your life and overall health, and I could not recommend Manta more. If you had a blank slate on how you could design education, you're given the almighty ruler of education in the world. How are you building that education system from the ground up?
I'd throw out the curriculum and start again.
Right.
Would be my first thing, because I think it's ridiculous that the curriculum is just so bulky these days, both here and in the UK, and all over a lot of the Western countries now, because we just keep adding to it rather than taking stuff away, right? And so that's just
Right.
ridiculous. I would increase wages, as you said. I would make it so that you need to actually that it's seen as a profession and the teachers are treated as professionals. I'd get rid of all tests and exams, so there wouldn't be any
Interesting.
testing or exams. habits, which is similar to what's done in Finland. Because we know that our memory system isn't actually there for us to remember the past, right? Our memory system is there so that we can perform better in the future. And so our brain is constantly looking for what we need to change and what we need to hold on to and what we can get rid of, right? And so if you test a child on a subject, then you test them the next day, then they're poorer the next day because they've started deleting the information because they don't think they need it anymore, right? So by testing
Yeah.
kids, we're making them dumber rather than making them smarter. And there's
Yeah.
no real reason to be testing them, right? Because if teachers were treated as professionals, teachers know which students are doing well and which students aren't doing well, right? They don't need to test them to know that. They already know that based on how they're going in the classroom and how they're responding to projects and so on. So it would be all project based, and the teachers would be given the opportunity to act like professionals and to mark the students based on how they performed and how well they were learning in the class, rather than having these ridiculous tests every 6 months or 12 months or whatever that actually don't tell us much at all, except for
Right.
how confident the kid is. Right?
Yes. Do you think that tracks the whole way from, the first years of school all the way up to university? Like, I remember it was absurd. Like, I studied neuroscience and I loved it. I went to lectures. I actively loved learning the stuff. But I remember there was just, I don't know what percentage, maybe 50% that would really not go to lectures. And then it would just be, how much can we rote learn? How much can we memorize? How much can we just imprint in our brain right before the exams? And there were cases of people just memorizing entire essays and then just absolutely regurgitating it word for word in the exam and getting like 90%. But if you asked them a single question about what the topic was about, they would have no idea. And exams, and you can't blame really the students there either, because they're gaming the system. They're always, human nature is to be lazy and to find the way to beat the system. So if they can get 90% by doing that, why wouldn't they? So do you think that there should be no exams basically at any age, that tracks the whole way through education?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and also you've given some great examples there, but also at university, of course, they'll go to the library and pick out all the exams from previous years. And,
Yeah.
you can only come up with a certain number of questions for each topic. And so they just study the questions that have been done before and previously and so on and know what questions are coming up. So they get, again, game the system in that way. So they're not
Yeah.
actually learning anything. They're not learning how to learn, or they're learning how to get through and how to pass the exams. And that's not what it should be about at all. So yeah, absolutely great.
I remember people were putting in the essay titles of the past 10 years, and they were finding statistical patterns in how the lecturers like to
Likely it was.
repeat. Oh, so every 4 years they repeat, it's going to be this section. It's either going to be the GABA A receptor or the GABA. They were finding all of these different rules that kind of limited the amount that you needed to study. And it meant that you would just ignore half of the curriculum. Because if your whole 6 months of studying is, you're either going to get like one or two exams, I mean, why would you do all the rest of it? It's not going to be examined in any way. It's going to
No,
hold you back in your final grade. It's going to hold you back in getting in your career and every step after that. It baffles me. It's so many elements of our education system absolutely astound me.
it is a strange game.
Where do you see AI fitting into everything?
Yeah, I find it funny, this whole obsession with AI all of a sudden, because of course we've had AI for a long time, right? I mean,
Yes.
I first published using um, the algorithms back, whatever it was, 15 years ago, to analyze fMRI data. So it's not a new game at all, and it's been going for a long time. And there's a great AI expert here in Australia who asked me to interview him when his book came out, and his book's called Faking It, because artificial actually means fake, right? So it's actually fake intelligence, and we were talking. He talks about it in his book, and we were talking about the fact that it's really the way it has been over the last 150 years, because it's been going on for about 150 years, trying to create artificial intelligence. It's really, there's no real reason for it other than to prove that we can create something that's more intelligent than us. Because what we really should be creating is stuff or ways of doing something that will do things that we're not good at, right? Rather than creating something that's better than us, why aren't we trying to create something that does things that we're not good at, so that we can do the stuff we're good at. Like, I don't understand why we're spending so much money and resources on creating language networks that can create books when I love writing books, and there's a lot of great, fiction writers that love writing books and are really good at writing books, and they do it better than the AI that does it. So let them write the books. And again, there's some amazing artists that love drawing and painting and doing all these things. So why create AI that does those things? Why not create AI that will get my son to clean his room at night, or get AI to, clean the house, or get AI to do the stuff that we're not actually good at, rather than creating it to just mimic us, which is what it's sort of being done at the moment.
I think
Which,
my
yeah,
response, sort of where I see, I'm curious to get your perspective on this. Where I see the real value of AI in education is in personalization, in that a system can really get to know how a student is dealing with a topic, how they're progressing, what areas they know and what areas they hypothetically don't know. And that means that for the first time ever, you could have a classroom where 30 students are not being held back by the person to their right, the person to the left. They're all sort of moving at their own speeds, because there's a distribution of learning ability within a classroom, right? And
absolutely.
having this model of one teacher and one test, and you've already said that you don't like tests, you're being graded against your class, and you're going at the speed of the slowest people at times and the speed of the fastest people at times, and it's never quite your level. But I sort of envision this adaptable curriculum to you, which is always being updated, and it's giving you exactly what you need to learn in that exact moment, and it's at the perfect level of difficulty, which is just about out of your reach, so you're pushed to get there. And it means that 30 people in a classroom can be doing that all at the same time. And it means that people are progressing at the same, or progressing at different rates, progressing at the perfect rate for them. And then I don't want to remove the teachers from this at all. I would have multiple sort of teachers in this room going around and helping people as they go. I do think that there's value in that, because it's never really been possible before for people to advance at a level that's perfect for them, right?
Yeah, I think there's a problem with that, though, and that is, one of the problems is that you're going to have to be constantly testing the students, or the AI is going to have to be constantly testing the students to know what level they're actually at. And so therefore you're, again, testing students rather than allowing them just to learn for the sake of learning. In which case you get back to the same problem as we had before, which is when they're being tested, then they're forgetting that stuff because they know they've already passed it. And so they can just go on to the next level. And we know that kids, especially confident kids, are very good at getting stuff right, but only to a certain level. So there's a lot of kids, especially in maths. There's a great professor over in the US, Barbara, I'm trying to think of her third name, but I can't remember her third name. But she's a mathematics professor in learning mathematics. And she talks about the fact that there's a lot of students in mathematics will get put into the highest class because they get everything right, and then they'll get put into the highest class again and again until they get to a certain level, and then all of a sudden they'll fall off because they haven't actually learnt the breadth of each of those topics. They've just run through it really quickly. And she talks about the fact that, learning is not like a ladder where you just climb one level and then get to the top of that level and then go to the next level and so on. But it's more like a climbing wall where some kids learn this is the easy way up and they go up that way. But what they need to do is learn all the other ways up as well before they move to the next level. And with AI, it's going to allow them to keep going to the next level until they hit that ceiling. But then they have to go all the way down to the bottom again to actually learn the breadth of the subject as well, which is really important. And you do that, you learn the breadth of it by actually teaching each other, right? We learn more when we teach. We learn so much more when we teach, which is why it's so good for the kids who are doing well to then teach the kids that are struggling a bit. Because they actually learn so much more from that, rather than having a computer in front of them that's actually teaching them and getting them to race through things and not actually learn the breadth of that area. So, there is potential there, but I think we need to be really careful about what we want to achieve. Do we want them to be passing grades, or do we want them to be learning the subject, the whole breadth of the subject, and understanding how it works for someone else and how other people interact with them, right? And I think one of the most important things we learn when we're at school is actually socialization, is about how to actually collaborate with each other. And we know 21st century schools, those are always listed with, collaboration, communication, leadership skills, and so on. And those things you learn by actually interacting with other members of your class,
Yeah.
not by sitting on a computer and getting pushed through the curriculum.
I definitely agree.
So
There's a lot of
controversial.
valid there's a lot of valid concerns there. I don't want kids in cubicles, only interacting with their device either. That's a
Yeah.
nightmare scenario. I think you can build the whole school day so that there is quite a lot of socialization, quite a lot of, that personalized learning at your level. I agree that you don't want someone to just gun through curriculum, but I feel like you can build AI systems in a way that does get that breadth and does capture it. And the idea isn't to just propel someone into quantum physics by the time they're 7, but to actually again just get them get them where they want to be and get them where they're happy. I think a big thing is that it can actually make the learning more enjoyable, because nothing is more fun than learning something that's like at the perfect level for you. That's what I think there's a big issue there, which is if someone can't engage with the content, they're completely detached, right? If I was going to learn Korean tomorrow, I get 0%. There's no level of engagement. And if someone is way ahead of the content, they're bored. So that thrill of just reaching a little bit beyond your means, I think there's big potential there, but I think you're right that there's a lot of concerns. What do you think
Most
the
of the
role?
research shows you should be at 70%, right? If you're
Yes,
getting
yeah,
70% correct, then most of the research suggests somewhere around 70%. And that's the ideal point where we want all the kids to be at. And you're
yes,
right, that's really hard to get in the classroom, because there are going to be kids who are going to be much better than that. But again, you've got the opportunity to take the kids who are doing much better and get them to teach the kids who aren't doing very well. And then the kids who are
100%
doing
agree
much
with that.
better, have that great opportunity to do that. And then the kids who are struggling get a great opportunity to actually work with someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things I love the most about being a neuroscience communicator is I get to learn. Like, I find that when I go through and learn about all the different topics for a podcast, I will then be learning it really well as I relay it in conversation, and I'll be teaching my girlfriend about it, my mom and dad, even though they definitely haven't asked about any of it. And that's the most rewarding thing for me,
That's
is
the most
learning these
rewarding
things
part.
and telling people,
Yeah,
even if they don't ask.
absolutely. But one
What
part of the AI thing that I don't think we talk enough about is, I think it has a huge opportunity to help give teachers more time to be in the classroom, right? Because it gives, if we design the AI so that they can actually use it for their admin and all of that curriculum back
Yes,
end
for sure.
stuff that isn't great fun, right? That none of them like, and all of them are
Yes.
spending lots of hours doing, and also doing curriculum, setting up their classes and making the classes more consistent across groups and so on. That's great. The admin in the background that the teachers aren't good at, and then they can then spend more time with the class. That's an awesome aspect of AI.
I'm taking as a default that all sort of admin tasks are just automated. That's kind of
I'm going
already
to
a
go
tick
that
box in my mind, that that's basically done. I am
You'd be surprised how many haven't yet, but
Yeah,
it'll
I'm
get
sure
there.
it astounds me. I am.
Yeah.
What are the biggest lessons we can take from neuroscience about how to learn most effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the, as I'm sure you're more than aware, but I think one of the most important things is sleep, right? We don't actually lay that information down into our long-term memory until we're sleeping. And then if we're
Yeah,
not sleeping enough, then that's a huge problem. And I do go to a lot of elite schools where you've got kids who are, getting up at 5 a.m. and rowing in the morning and then going to school all day. And then they go to tutoring after school, and then they do something else after that. And, they're lucky if they get 5 hours sleep every night, which is just ridiculous. And it's like
yeah.
you're spending all this money to get these kids a great education, but they're not sleeping enough to actually lay down the memories so that they can actually remember any of it. So I think sleep is one of the big ones that we all need to be thinking about. And parents, especially parents who are wanting overachieving kids, need to really, really think about. But everybody needs to think about it. Yeah, it's definitely a big one. But the other one is the whole use it or lose it, right? That we know that our brains are plastic and they're changing, and the idea that you can, knowing now that there aren't critical periods that we go through during development, that you can learn anything you want to learn at any stage, and that's really important for us as humans, that we are continually learning. We continue learning throughout our lives. I think is another big one that we need to get into society, that if you want to live a good life, you've got to continue learning even after you retire, right? Or to be honest, I don't think anyone should retire, because you retire, you usually die, right? We
Yeah.
need to be learning all the time, and that actually keeps our brains strong. But we need to be learning complex things and different things and new things, and all of that sort of stuff, which is why, running a podcast is obviously a great thing to do, because you're learning things all the time. But I think those are the two, really critical ones, which probably aren't that interesting to most people, but they are really important.
Well, maybe we can go into the mechanism a little bit so that can be a little bit more interesting, maybe. Why would me learning piano, I have a keyboard that sits above me and kind of taunts me that it's collecting dust. Why theoretically would, if I learned the keyboard, why would that help hypothetically with learning Spanish, with my neuroscience, with my maths, with computer science, with any other topics?
Yeah, great question. So we know, I like to think of the brain like our muscles, and a lot of people think of it as though your brain's one muscle, and it's not really one muscle, right? There's lots of different parts of our brains that are involved in lots of different things. And so if you, for example, decided you wanted to become, the fittest person in the world, and you just sat there and did bicep curls all day, you get a huge big biceps, right? But then when you bend over to pick up a box, you do your back and your knees and your calves and everything, right? You can destroy yourself because of the fact that all the other muscles haven't been exercised. And it's the same for our brain. Just sitting there and doing Sudoku all day, every day, is only going to exercise a very small part of your brain. And the rest of it's just going to atrophy, because if you're not using it, you're losing it, right? It's going to slowly atrophy away. So we want to be doing lots of different things all the time. And when you're actually learning, you're using more of your brain, because it not only takes, when we're doing normal things that we do every day, it's really habitual. So it's stuff that we've already become habitual, where it's become automatic, and when you don't have to think about it. And we think most of what we probably do every day is just by habit. It's just habitual. You just do it because that's what you always do, and there's a cue that sets off that behavior, and then you get a nice response for it. Whereas when you're learning something new, you're using your working memory, which is really important for us to keep active, and you're using your attention to drive the information to your working memory. So there's a lot of extra areas of your brain that are actually involved in the actual learning of a complex problem, which is then later transferred to those more automatic or more habitual areas of our brain. So car driving is a great example, right? When you first learn when you first learn to drive a car, it's very complex and it's very hard, and there's lots of stuff going on, and you've got to concentrate 100% on doing that, right? You can't have the radio on. You can't talk to the person beside you. The person beside you is probably yelling at you the whole time because you keep making mistakes. You can't do anything else while you're actually doing it. But then after a long period of time, it then becomes habitual. It gets downloaded, well, sort of downloaded. It's not really downloaded, but it's transferred mainly to your cerebellum and to some other areas of your brain, and then it becomes automatic. And you can do you can talk to the person beside you. You can think about what you're doing at work. Often you can drive somewhere and not even remember driving there because it's become so automatic and habitual. So by the time when it gets to that stage, it's not working much of your brain. It's only sort of the cerebellum and a couple of other areas that are active during that. So we need to be learning stuff so that we're activating all those other areas, and we're using our attentional network, and we're using our working memory, so that we can, activate everything and get it all down,
Right.
and keep it active, keep it strong, like the rest of it, like our muscles.
It makes complete sense, but is there concrete evidence which suggests that if my main goal at the moment is to learn as much as possible about neuroscience, really wide ranging topic, of course, but is there evidence that suggests that I would be better off learning the keyboard, learning Spanish, learning how to play tennis, that those ancillary activities actually do help in the main goal of learning neuroscience?
Good question. No, there's not. It's fairly conflicting, actually. Yeah, there's a lot of
Interesting.
evidence both ways. So it's not definitive. There is evidence. There is some evidence that learning an instrument as a kid can help in educational outcomes, so it can help in other areas if they learn an instrument. But there's no evidence as an adult that that will actually happen. But learning an instrument or learning a new language when you retire will decrease the likelihood that you'll get Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. So it is a positive thing. But whether or not learning an instrument will help you learn neuroscience, that link is not definitive, except for with kids that it's been shown. But we're not sure about adults yet.
Yeah, someone needs to run those studies. I
They
am.
do. They do.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to learn?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think they try to learn too much at once. A lot of people will go, "Oh, I'm going to learn dirt, and I'm going to read this book," and then they just read the book, and then they think, "Now I've learned it." But it's not, right? It takes a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
You best to do it in small chunks, and so doing 10 minutes. 10 minutes a day is better than doing half an hour or an hour twice a week, right? Because you're doing it consistently and you're doing it every day. A rehearsal is really important. So actually going over the information that you learned previously. Flashcards are great, right? Where you actually write a question on the front and the answer on the back, and then you have a big stack of flashcards and you look at the first one, you look at the question, you think of the answer, and then you turn it over. And if you're right, then you put it aside, and if you're wrong, then you put it to the back, and you keep going through them, and then you pick up the ones that you got right to begin with, and you will have forgotten those by now, and so you actually go through them again and so on. Like all of those old school techniques are actually really good at teaching us, but having the small chunks is really important rather than trying to remember. You can't sit down for an hour or 2 hours or whatever. Using something like the Pomodoro technique is a good way to study, but just do the 25 minutes and then go. Have you spoken about the Pomodoro technique before?
I don't think I
That
have, but I'm sure people will be quite familiar with it.
familiar with it, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's 25 minutes and then 5 minute break where you walk around and then you sit down again, but you concentrate on one thing at a time. And that's a
Yeah.
great way to study. But what you want to do is just do one 25-minute break and then have a break and do something else. And then do it 25 minutes the next day and the next day and so on. So you're doing these smaller chunks rather than doing larger chunks. Or do 25 minutes in the morning, 25 minutes in the afternoon on that subject. Has a big impact. And we also know, and of course, sleeping is really important.
Yeah.
And we also know that you lay down your memories in reverse order, right? So you lay down the last stuff that you read, that you were studying at night, and then go backwards in time. And so if you write notes and then you read them just before you go to sleep, that'll be the first stuff that gets laid down. So that'll actually get laid down better because it'll get laid down then, and then it'll get laid down when you actually looked at it earlier on in the day as well during the night. So you get double whammy when you
Yes.
lay it down, so you remember it better as well. So that's another, little trick.
One of the big concerns I have about AI and learning is I think it can trick us into thinking we're learning. If we ask a language model like ChatGPT, explain this concept to me in computational neuroscience, which I do a lot. I do use as a tutor. I think it's very good at giving responses, but I think it can trick us into assuming that if we read the response that we understand it. It kind of takes the effort out. There's a lot of effort involved in having to go search for that answer and read different things and piecing it together. And I think in that effort is important for learning, whereas AI makes
Yes.
everything so easy and seamless that it's hard to know how much is actually going in. You mentioned flashcards, and I think you can do a lot of really cool systems with flashcards where you ask the AI to make flashcards, but I don't think a lot of people are doing that. I think most people are just kind of asking it for the answer and just kind of copy and pasting it out, and they're forgetting that learning does require effort. Like learning is an active thing. It's not very much a passive thing. I think there's good evidence to suggest that learning it's really active, and if you're passively learning, it's kind of in one ear and out the other, and AI can make it very passive. So we need to make sure that when we're learning with AI and as we integrate AI into education, that it's not passive, that it's active processes, going back and forth, asking further questions. What does this mean exactly? Like, okay, I think I understand this, but I don't know if I fully understand this. And digging deeper and engaging that active process of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I often talk because engagement at schools now is a big catch catchword, right? Everyone's talking about it. We've got to get the students engaged in school.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the time we entertain the kids rather than engage the kids. And that's a difference between, again, passive versus active, which is why I brought it up and what I talk about. If the student's really engaged, then it has to be through an active process where they're actually doing something. They're writing notes, or they're coming up with questions, or so that they're actually involved in the process. Otherwise, you are just entertaining. If they're not active, then they're passive and they're just being entertained, and they're not going to remember the information. It's not going to actually result in learning. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about devices, mobile phones in classrooms? I think I might be able to predict the high level answer of this, but give me some more of the nuance.
They're distracting. And they're not only they're distracting because you get the beeps and the buzzes and the dings and all of those things, and we know those capture your attention. That's why they work, right? We could become addicted to these things because they capture our attention, and when they capture our attention, they delete our working memory. And you need to hold information in your working memory long enough so that it can get transferred to a temporary store, so then it can be transferred to your long-term memory when you're sleeping. And that's how it's a learning process, right? And so to hold it in your working memory long enough, you've got to be attending to what it is that you're trying to learn. And if you get distracted, you lose it, right? So you don't actually transfer it to temporary source, so it never goes into. And we're constantly being distracted by these devices because of those notifications.
Yes.
But also, they're stressful, right? We know that as soon as you lift up a laptop, you turn on a laptop, as soon as you look at your phone, you get an increase in cortisol levels, which is an indication of stress. And we know that stress decreases the likelihood of learning, right? So you decrease learning because you're stressed, because you decrease dopamine in your system. So just having a device is increasing stress levels, which means that you're actually less likely to learn. We also know that you learn, 15 to 20% less if you read off a screen than if you read off a piece of paper. So you're not going to learn as easily if you're reading off a screen than if you're reading off a piece of paper. And again, typing results in 15 to 20% less retention of the information than writing handwritten notes, because writing handwritten notes slow you down, and also the motion is different. So it's a different movement for each letter, whereas with typing, it's the same motion for each letter. And so all of those things, are all impacting negatively on learning. So they're a great resource, but they should be seen as a tool, not as an essential part of learning. Yeah. So they shouldn't be, it shouldn't be the kids walk in and pull out their laptops. It should be kids walk in, pull out their notepads, and then if it's necessary, they then get access to a device to do whatever it happens to be that they need to do. But it shouldn't be the default. It should be when necessary only. I think they're a great tool.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point there. I have a digital tablet, so I write on my digital tablet, and I have all my books on here, and I find that it helps a lot. It helps a lot more than typing. I think it comes back to the effort, I guess, and the amount of time that you hold a concept in working memory. If you have to physically handwrite it all out, for one, it's more effort, but you're also holding that concept in your mind for the time that you're writing it, and it might be 5 times slower. Which, I don't know how long you have to hold the concept in working memory, but then you go slowly to the next topic and you're writing that out, and then you go slowly to the next topic. But if you're typing it out, and especially if you're on AI and you're copy and pasting, most of the time now I'm copy and pasting huge passages across. It's like, that's zero effort. Like, I've held those concepts in working memory for no time at all.
No. So it doesn't transfer directly from the computer into your brain. You've got to actually, as you said before, you've got to engage in it, right? Yes. And you've got to engage in it actively. And writing does slow you down quite a bit compared to typing. So it's definitely compared to copy and pasting. So it's so important for us to do that, to slow down. Plus, you've got the links and anchors, right? When you write notes, handwritten notes, you have, it's on pieces of paper, and textbooks are really well designed to actually help with learning, because they put links and anchors on each page. So they'll put, figures, and they'll put little boxes and all those sorts of things, which help with us retaining that information, because we don't remember the actual words that we read. We remember where that concept or that idea was relative to the other things. So you remember, oh, I was on this side of the page and there was a box there that had a graph of a thing, and then it was telling me about blah, 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 right? It's actually relative. Whereas when you read on a screen, everything scrolls up and down. So you don't have any of those links and anchors to actually remember where the information is.
Yeah.
And so you don't remember the information as well. Whereas when you either read on a pad or, the Kindles and that are good because it's each page just like it would be in a book or in a normal textbook. Plus, when you write your own notes on a notepad, you have all those links and anchors because you usually scribble on things or I have shocking handwriting, but I'll draw things and all the rest of it, which helps me remember the information that I've just read as well because I create all those links and anchors myself.
Yeah. I do think we have to be so cautious about how technology continues to integrate into classrooms that we remember that it's, technology is great because it makes things less effortful, but learning, as we've said, is something that requires effort. So in the whole making it easy and making it simple and presenting the answer directly to the student, there's a lot of things that, and I think one of the most kind of pernicious aspects of that is fooling the student into believing that they actually are learning and that they are understanding and they're just covering entire chapters of books and they're learning entire corpuses of information because they're just kind of scanning it on a screen. I think they could very easily fool themselves into believing that. I remember when I was studying for my exams, I would always multitask like crazy. And it's terrible thinking back at it now, like that I was never told that this was a really bad idea or never explicitly told. But I used to have a little game, like a turn-based game that I would just click on a little treasure and then I'd go back to my maths. And then I was splitting my attention like every 30 seconds. And knowing what I know now, it's stunning I even passed my exams. Because it's just so bad. It's crazy. I kind of think it's insane that we don't have a class called the brain. We don't need to wait until people are, a lot older. And we don't need to dive into frontal parietal control networks. You don't need to talk about the, basal ganglia circuits, but you can give basic principles of how the brain works very early on. Because I think a lot of these things that have been coming up in the cognitive science research, like multitasking, like literally just having your phone on your desk, there's attention that's being drawn to it in not picking it up. One of the best things that I've done is I don't work with my phone in my room anymore. It can't even be, not just on the desk, but it can't be in the room. Like, how many of these things could we just put into a class and start teaching people earlier on? Because I think brain literacy is something that the world needs desperately. I mean, of course you agree with that, but I think it could start way earlier. It could start way earlier than it does.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I first started in this whole journey to presenting at schools and to organizations by running with my partner, Anina Rich. We ran Neuroscience for Kinder Kids, which was for kindergarten kids, and we were teaching them neuroscience, and it was fantastic. We loved it. And I presented at a Society for Neuroscience in New York, and it was written up in their magazine. And it's still very popular. And they love it, and they're so engaged in it because they want to understand. But yeah, we should all be learning. The thing that really gets up my nose is that we don't teach teachers about the brain.
Yes.
I mean, what they
have this as a question down. This is
dealing
shocking,
with,
isn't it?
That's what they do, right?
Yes.
I like to call teachers neuroplasticians because they're actually changing the brains of their students, right? They're actually, and I think they get paid better too because it sounds like there's some sort of clinical degree. But yeah, they don't learn anything about the brain, and that's just crazy as far as I'm concerned, because that should be 101 in any teaching degree, is how the brain learns and how the brain perceives the world and how the brain connects to other people and all those things. It's so important.
Yeah.
Can I bring up another thing that you brought up before, which I think is really, really important too for people to think about, which is, you mentioned that learning is hard, but I'd also like to say that life is hard, and that's what makes it so wonderful, right? The problem with society, I think, at the moment is that we get stuff for free, and therefore we don't work for it, and therefore we don't love what we do. And I have a very good friend, Brock Bastian, who wrote a book called The Other Side of Happiness. He researches happiness and how to be really happy rather than just getting a little dopamine hit. And he's shown that you don't you don't get true reward. You don't get true enjoyment out of something unless you work hard for it, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't, you know, if you were driven around a marathon circuit and then dropped off at the end, you don't receive all the endorphins and everything in your brain
Yeah.
as to someone who actually runs the marathon, right? Or
Yeah.
if you go to the top of a mountain, you can get driven to the top of a mountain and it's beautiful and it's all the rest of it. But actually climbing that mountain, you know, it releases a whole bunch of endorphins and everything because you worked hard to get there. And same with learning, right? Actually learning something, working hard to learn something results in a huge amount of endorphins being released where you really feel good. I mean, I'm sure when you've passed your neuroscience degree, you know, you partied hard because you felt good about it because you worked
Yeah.
hard to get it, right? Whereas if someone had just handed you a degree and said, hey, you're a neuroscientist, you can start your own podcast now, you wouldn't have got anywhere near the enjoyment out of it as you did from
Yes.
actually working hard to get it. And I
It
think
was even
that's
more
something we
delayed
miss.
because it was during COVID. So the delayed gratification was even
Oh,
further. So when things opened up and we had the degree, it was, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
it was
But
party time.
I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I think, and there's a lot of evolutionary mechanisms in the brain that attach effort to value. And we live in a society today that delivers immediate value with absolutely no effort.
No.
You know, one of the best things I've done in the last few years is pick up triathlon because that's basically just all effort and very
Hard work.
very little value. And I love it. But I think this is sort of my hypothesis is that the effort that I apply to that really does seem to trickle over into every other area. In that, if I go out for a hard run and then I'll feel great afterwards, I'm much more likely to put my effort into learning and make it difficult. And then when like everyone gets to the point when they're working and it's hard and they're kind of fidgeting and they're like their brain is drifting off. And I feel like if you've just have a bigger reservoir of difficult and effortful things that you've done, you're more willing to push through that and you're more willing to see the value in pushing through it. Not just running head first through walls without any thought, but you kind of have the known integration that if you push through this hard effort that there will be value on the other side and it'll be even greater for it. Again, like another one that just should be taught in the brain class in school. You know, this whole attachment of effort and value is just is another example of something that I think is intrinsic in the brain, is intrinsic to humanity. Everyone should know it, but not it's not as known as it should be, and especially among developing children.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's what, but it's not why. I think there's a lot of issues in society now because we don't have to strive for things at the moment, and which is really sad because I do see a lot of kids who just expect it to be handed to them,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be right. At some stage, they're going to hit a wall, and then they hit the wall, and all of a sudden they have mental health issues and all the rest of it. It's like, well, hang on, if they had to strive, then yeah, they wouldn't have had these issues come up. I don't think as much as what we're seeing in society at the moment. A lot of that has to do with technology, but it also has to do with a lot of other things going on in society these days that we've allowed kids to just be not to be kids anymore. I mean, even the whole socialization, right? We need to socialize by actually making mistakes and actually getting out there and actually hanging out with people and upsetting someone occasionally and them upsetting us occasionally to work out what our boundaries are and what their boundaries are and what's important to us and what's not important to us. And, you go in friend's place and, have a fight and realize that you shouldn't have done whatever you did, and kids aren't learning all those things anymore.
Right.
Because they don't do those things anymore. And I think that's really sad because it's so
Right.
important for us to, as humans, to learn how to connect with each other and collaborate with each other. And that's how we end up learning those things. But we don't do it anymore.
Right. It
Anywhere
takes
near as much as we
iteration.
should.
You know, it takes social feedback loops. You know, we
Yeah.
used to go through so many social interactions that you'd learn from. And I think it's fairly I think it would be pretty easy to assume correctly that generations are getting less social feedback loops. They're getting just less interactions where they learned, oh, I talked to Harry here and I shouldn't have said this thing. And, that they're all just social feedback loops that you're iterating on and learning and refining your model of the world.
Yes.
Another topic I'm curious to touch on. What do you think about the evidence and shrinking attention spans? Do you think people's attention spans are shrinking and getting worse?
Well, Based on the students I work with, I would say yes, but it's a hard one because most of the research is done in a more global way. So looking at things like how long YouTube feeds people will watch, or how long TikTok reels now are, and those
Yeah.
sorts of things, and all those are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, which suggests that people won't attend to things for as long because those algorithms are based on what people will actually listen to or watch, and so they're going to feed the stuff to people that they're actually going to watch. And so it does suggest that they are getting shorter. We need better research into what's actually happening there because we don't have we don't have a lot of good research into whether or not it's actually occurring at a neural level or whether or not it's just a boredom, right? Maybe it's just that the stuff on YouTube isn't interesting anymore. I don't know. Yeah, we need to do better. There needs to be more research into it. My gut feeling is yes, but it's only a gut feeling.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of been the general answer that I've gotten on the podcast because I'm curious because it seems so probable that it is for the reasons that you mentioned, but maybe that the evidence isn't as conclusive. Are
Yeah,
you kind of worried in general about mental health with newer generations?
yeah, hugely for multiple reasons. I mean, the biggest one, but I was a facial, I studied facial expressions for a long, long time. Um, and facial expressions are learnt through trial and error again through that experience. And we know that there's been an increase in kids and toddlers with what we call still face effect, right? Where they're not using their face in the same way and they don't understand facial expressions in the same way. There was an interesting study done where they just stopped kids from using devices for a week, for 5 days, primary school kids. I think they were grade 5 kids from memory. And they had improved facial expression perception just after 5 days, which of course
Wow.
suggests normal facial expression is abnormal, which is
Wow.
really a concern. Yeah, and that really
Startling
worries.
result.
Amazing. Yeah, it is. And that area really worries me because it's because of a lack of socialization. There's also been quite a few studies over in the US where they've looked at um, the use of facial expressions in toddlers based on how often their carers use phones. Because of course, a toddler would normally learn what facial expressions go to with what emotions because they'd be playing in the park or something and they'd fall over and hurt themselves and they'd have a bad feeling and they'd look up to their carer and the carer would look sad because they just saw them fall over, or they'll do something funny and they'll feel good and they'll look up to the carer and the carer will be smiling. But because if the carer's on the phone or on a device, they don't see those things happening, so they don't respond to them. There's no facial expression, so the toddler doesn't actually then learn the association between the different feelings and the different facial expressions. And so it's been
Interesting.
shown that these kids, the more parents use or the more carers use phones, the less able the toddlers are to understand what the different facial expressions mean or use the different facial expressions themselves, which then makes it hard for them to have friends because if you're not able to portray how you're feeling to someone else, then they don't understand how you're feeling. So therefore, there's
Right.
no empathy going on for your behaviour. Um, we also there's huge correlation between ADHD and screen use, right? And there's also the studies in the US now showing the abnormal development of the white matter tracks in kids who have been given devices at a young age. And all of those things really concern me as to where that's going to end up because we've never seen this before, right? And so what's going to happen when these kids are teenagers?
Yeah, the facial expression one is a super interesting example that I didn't know and hadn't thought about. We assume that these things, and I know I'm a big fan of Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on emotion, and she kind of dispels a lot of the myths about these things being very hardwired signals in us. But
Yeah.
it's kind of shocking to think that all of these facial expressions, it is all just cultural transmission, and there may be some level of hardwiring there. There's murkiness and there's debate, and it's not 100% defined, but I mean, as you can see that at least some of it, probably the majority of those facial expressions is cultural transmission and learned. And the fact that somebody can just not learn those things because they're spending all of their time whatever they're doing on screens. I don't even know what what a 5-year-old is doing on a screen these days, playing Fruit Ninja or some 10-year advanced version of Fruit Ninja. I don't know, but they're not just looking at humans and imitating their responses and learning how that works. And it's such an interesting example.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest implications of that down the line?
Well, I think we're already seeing it with friends, right? We now know the 15 to 25-year-olds are the loneliest group within society now. The loneliest group used to be the elderly, right? Because as you get older, you move around and you lose friends, and friends die, and all the rest of it. And so the older groups used to be the loneliest group. It's now been shown, with the World Health Organization came out with a recent study showing that the 15 to 25-year-olds are now the loneliest group in society.
Wow.
Who have the least number of friends. Yeah, which is really, really scary. But it's really hard to make friends if you can't portray how you're actually feeling to them, or you don't understand how they're feeling to you, right? You've got to have that back and forth, and you've got to have the empathy, and you've got to have the understanding to both make friends and then to hold on to those friends, because friends don't stick around if you can't respond to them when they're crying, or respond to them when they're happy, or you know what I mean. Like it's an interaction, and they don't seem to have the capability to be involved in that dance that we normally do, or we should be able to normally do if we've had that normal development and those normal experiences.
It's a really good example. Mark, I know we're running out of time. I had about 20 questions here on emotions that I
Oh,
really wanted to dive into because I love the neuroscience of emotions. So find it a really fascinating topic. Let's finish on this with all of your knowledge of the brain, knowledge of neuroscience. What are some ways that it's changed how you live your life on a day-to-day basis?
Good question. Um, I booking time to spend with friends on a regular basis. So I spend a lot of time traveling now because I do a lot of presenting, and I work from my little shack. So I make sure that multiple times a week I'll catch up with friends and have coffee and just sit with them and just chat about stuff, because we know that that's one of the most important things for us as humans to do. And it'll, according to the Harvard study that came out recently, it's been going on for 75 years, they've shown that that's that connection that seems to be the thing that can increase your lifespan, decrease your likelihood of neurodegenerative diseases, and increases your IQ and decreases your likelihood of having heart problems and so on. So, I'm getting to the age now where it's all those things are a worry. And so I do that regularly. I've turned off all the notifications on all my devices, so I don't get beeps or buzzes or anything 100%. Like that. I just, that's number one, I think. I have, an app on my phone which turns my phone into a minimalist phone. It's like a dumb phone, if you like. And and I can't use apps on it. And, it gives me 15 minutes on an app and then it kicks me off for the rest of the day, which is great because, they're very addictive and they're very strong at that pull. And then I try to scare myself regularly. I surf, so that's scary, but I try to do things that challenge me. My son recently turns 13 and wanted to go-kart racing and hotted up go-karts, so I went and did that, even though I probably shouldn't at my age, and I was a bit sore afterwards. But I like to scare myself regularly because I think it's really important for us to do things that challenge us in different ways. Not necessarily scare myself, but challenge myself in different ways.
I love it. Those are amazing points. I agree with all of them. Mark, this has been so much fun. I could have had you for a 4-hour conversation. I barely scratched the surface. So enjoyable. I love the neuroscience communication that you do. And thank you so much for talking to me. I've really, really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, mate. It's been great to talk. And if you want me to come back, just give me a yell.
100%. If you made it this far, then you must at least partially be interested in brain science. And who can blame you? It is the most interesting topic in the world. Twice per week, I talk to the most amazing neuroscientists in the entire world. So if you're interested, then subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below who you'd like me to speak to next. And thank you so much for your ongoing support.